Today is Saturday, September 9th. It seems organized labor is having a moment in what has already been called a summer of strikes. Delivery drivers, teachers, airline pilots, baristas, hotel workers, healthcare workers, Hollywood writers and actors, the list goes on, have all either walked off the job or gotten close. And another major strike could be just days away. 146,000 members of the United Auto Workers Union, or UAW, could stop working as soon as Thursday if they don't reach a deal with three big American automakers in Detroit. Later in the show, we'll get into the key sticking points in those negotiations and how a strike might impact car prices. But first, what's up with all these walkouts across the country and across industries? The chief economist for ZipRecruiter, Julia Pollak, is here to explain. She uses real-time data to measure the health of the labor market, identify hiring trends, and help both employers and job seekers prepare for the future of work. So she's sharing what's happening with strikes nationwide and what to expect next. Plus, why she thinks membership in unions will continue to actually go down despite increasing public support for them. Welcome to the Newsworthy Special Edition Saturday, when we sit down with a different expert or celebrity every Saturday to talk about something in the news. Don't forget to tune in every Monday through Friday for our regular episodes, where we provide all the day's news in 10 minutes. I'm Erica Mandy. It's now time for today's Special Edition Saturday. Julia Pollak, thank you so much for coming on the Newsworthy.
Thank you for having me on the show.
So first, there seems to be this nationwide trend this year of worker strikes, or at least workers who are threatening to strike across so many different industries. What factors are contributing to that trend? And does this year stand out to you?
Yes, it does. So even in official data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the numbers of workers absent from their jobs due to labor actions this summer have been the highest in over a decade. And that's before some of these larger strikes even began. So why is this happening now? Well, first of all, this is an incredibly tight labor market. We've had below 4% unemployment for 19 straight months. And that is sort of a magical tipping point. Below that level, employers really struggle to find workers. Workers typically find new jobs quite easily, and they have more bargaining power and more leverage. And so they're less afraid about going on strike and being left jobless because there are plenty of alternatives. And they also, have a little bit of muscle to flex. The other key issue is inflation, the surge in inflation following the pandemic. Real wages declined for 21 months in a row, and workers saw their purchasing power erode. And that, historically, has been a major factor encouraging labor actions and strikes for higher wages.
Can you expand a little bit more on how the pandemic played a role in all of this?
Absolutely. I mean, my great-grandfather was the first Black trade unionist in Southern Africa. And following the influenza pandemic of 1918, he got his start because he rallied dock workers when inflation soared after that pandemic, and employers very quickly caved. So this is something that has happened historically before. Pandemics cause supply chain shortages, they cause inflation, they cause labor shortages too, and they sort of boost the strength and leverage of workers, of the people who do show up to work.
And I know you've mentioned that while all of these factors are impacting all of the different industries, that each industry also kind of has its own worries. Can you go through some of those?
Yes, so over the past few months, there has been a strike for just about every economic anxiety under the sun. The Hollywood writers' strike, for example, is not just about wages and inflation. It's largely about artificial intelligence and new business models that workers fear are eroding their earnings and that could mimic and possibly even replace them entirely. Another issue that reared its head in recent strikes was the issue of fairness. So in the UPS negotiations, workers talked about the perceived unfairness of recent wage compression following the pandemic. So in a tight labor market, the wages of new hires jumped, but those of more experienced workers did not keep pace initially. And so many workers, more experienced workers, felt slighted and felt that they needed to be compensated too. Another set of strikes took place among hotel workers in Southern California. Those workers were less concerned about AI and favoritism towards newcomers and more concerned about inflation, particularly about increased housing costs and transportation costs since the pandemic. And so that was strictly a demand for increased pay to offset those costs. Another issue that has been prominent is the issue of burnout. So in many organizations, in hospitals, in cities, there were such huge staffing shortages that led employers to impose mandatory overtime and caused workers to burn out. So in some industries, like in San Jose City, for example, workers are arguing that there need to be meaningful improvements to wages and benefits that really increase recruitment and retention and allow staffing levels to recover so that all employees can have better work-life balance.
And do you think when unions and strikes are successful, like we saw with UPS threatening to strike and ultimately getting a much better deal, does that influence other unions' decisions about how to move forward?
Absolutely. Many of the UAW demands that we're seeing now are likely inspired by the UPS workers' success. And especially when you have these large employers involved, when they raise wages or add a benefit, it sets the standard that smaller employers now have to meet in order to hang on to their workers. There is certainly a risk. The Hollywood writers' strike is one that worries me, because I don't think that the writers are in a strong position. Fighting against technology seems historically to be a losing proposition. So that's the strike where we don't really seem to see very much movement, and the two parties still seem very far apart.
And we've talked about the tight labor market a few times, but that is starting to loosen a little bit, right? How long might this trend last?
Yeah, so a lot of people are saying that the labor market is cooling, but we may be adding fewer workers, but also companies are now more fully staffed. So we have this constraint in the labor force that's not actually getting any looser. Unemployment remains historically very, very low, and there doesn't really seem to be much of an end in sight. At the same time, our working age population in the United States is no longer growing, and we have an aging population with lots and lots of retirements taking place or expected in the coming months and the next year or so. That matters in many industries where the workforce skews older and where there aren't that many workers coming into the pipeline because younger workers are disproportionately college educated and less interested in the skilled trades, for example. So there's a situation where workers understand that they are in a highly constrained labor market and where something needs to change.
Gallup found last year that 71% of Americans support labor unions, which is the highest percentage of approval since 1965. Do you expect that support to last? And what's your overall take about the pros and cons of unions in general?
What's interesting is that even though unions have become more popular and also more active, the share of workers who are in unions keeps getting lower and lower every single year. And that's because of structural changes taking place in the labor market, like the fact that jobs are becoming more and more specialized. And so in many companies, you have just one person with each job title. You don't have a whole huge army of workers with the same roles, hours, location, etc. It's much easier for workers to organize if there are thousands of them doing the same thing in the same factory. And that's not the way work is organized for the most part anymore. Pros and cons: unions do typically get their workers better job security, better benefits, and higher pay. They can be slower to adapt. So during the pandemic, non-unionized workers actually saw bigger, faster wage increases initially than unionized workers. That's because employers could just negotiate on a one-time basis with each new candidate coming in the door when they were desperate to hire. In unionized industries, it was much harder for employers to do that, and increasing pay required renegotiating contracts with thousands of people. But now, wage growth is picking up for unionized workers as those negotiations take place under the threat of strikes.
So in general, what do you expect moving forward? And is the United States on the verge of a new labor movement, or are we in a new labor movement?
I think the labor movement is having a moment, and that is because this is such a tight labor market and because of inflation and the pandemic. Long term, however, there doesn't seem to be any reversal in the trend towards shrinking union membership.
Final thought about this topic that you can leave our audience with.
What is interesting is that sometimes these deals that seem like they might be painful for employers can really be a win-win for everybody, as in the case of UPS. Immediately what we saw after the deal was announced was a huge spike in job search for jobs at UPS and an improvement in the candidate quality behind those applications. When you make jobs better, you can often attract more productive, happier employees who make the customer experience better and make you a more competitive organization.
Still ahead, we're diving deeper into the stalemate in Detroit. Our next guest has been covering the auto industry for more than 2 decades. Jamie Butters is the executive editor of the weekly newspaper Automotive News and the host of the Daily Drive podcast. He explains why negotiations are stalled and what's at stake for both workers and car buyers if yet another strike begins. Plus, the role of electric vehicles in all of this. That's coming up. But first, a quick break for our sponsors. I've had a lot of big life milestones lately, from having our child a couple years ago to recently buying a home. And while these things bring us so much joy, they also made me realize we need to do more to secure our future and our child's future. And Trust and Will made this process so easy. My husband and I recently sat down to put together our first will, and I was surprised by how simple yet thorough the process with Trust and Will was. We really liked the guided format. In fact, it only took us about 20 minutes from home, 20 minutes to have peace of mind for years to come. Each will or trust is crafted to be state-specific and customized to your specific needs. Everything from care wishes to nominating guardians for our child, power of attorney, and more. It also ensures that we've now prepared and organized our documents in one place. Of course, bank-level encryption is also appreciated. So gain peace of mind today with Trust and Will. Get 10% off plus free shipping of your estate plan documents by visiting trustandwill.com/newsworthy. That's 10% off and free shipping at trustandwill.com/newsworthy. This episode is also brought to you by Nutrafol. Ever wish you had visibly thicker hair? Whether you are simply tired of having thin hair or have actively noticed some shedding or changes, Nutrafol is here to help. Their hair growth supplements use drug-free ingredients that target root causes of thinning hair and promote healthy hair growth. And I can tell you about these products because not only is Nutrafol the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement clinically shown to improve visible thickness and strength, but also my own dermatologist recommended it after I had my baby and started noticing changes in my hair. And the good news is I've noticed a difference in the thickness and health of my hair. First, I used their postpartum option, then moved on to Nutrafol Women. So no matter your life stage, take the first step to visibly thicker, healthier hair. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering the Newsworthy listeners $10 off your first month's subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com and enter the promo code NEWSWORTHY. Find out why over 4,000 healthcare professionals recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol, Nutrafol.com with the promo code NEWSWORTHY. Nutrafol.com, promo code NEWSWORTHY. Okay, now to our conversation with the executive editor of Automotive News, Jamie Butters. Jamie, thank you for joining us here on the Newsworthy.
Glad to be here.
So 146,000 members of the United Auto Workers Union could go on strike next week if a deal is not reached with the big 3 American automakers. So we're talking Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis. What are the key sticking points right now for the workers union? And then we'll talk about the automakers' response.
The UAW members and their leadership, they're very frustrated. COVID times were so bizarre in the auto industry where automakers and auto dealers made really record profits. Auto workers did fine. After some downtime at the beginning of the pandemic, they had pretty steady work. They had really good profit sharing payouts, but they've seen, record high profits for the automakers. They've seen, big increases in pay for CEOs and other executives, and they want to get their share.
And I've heard other people call their requests pretty ambitious, especially as we're seeing electric vehicles become the main focus, which takes less labor. What do you make of some of these requests, and what do you expect the automakers' response to be moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, the UAW themselves call them ambitious and audacious. I mean, they're asking for 20% raises off the top and 5% raises for the next 4 years after that. So it compounds to a 46% raise over about a 4.5 year contract. They want to go to a 4-day work week. They want a return of defined benefit pensions and on and on. It's really a laundry list of demands. The automakers they know they have to give big raises because they've made a lot of money and they can afford it, but they don't want to go back to things like defined benefit pensions and, gold-plated retiree healthcare, because that was a big part of what got them into bankruptcy in the first place. So they don't want to go back to making those same mistakes, making promises in good times that they can't keep in leaner times.
And what role are electric vehicles playing in all of this?
A really complicating one. The UAW looks backward and says, hey, you guys have made all this money. You need to share some of that with the workers who made it all possible. The automakers are looking forward and they're like, we've got to invest tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars in new vehicles, in new plants, in new technology. Oh, and by the way, EVs lose money. Everybody's but Tesla's pretty much lose money at this point. You've got to get through what some analysts call a profit desert, until you can get to the point where you have enough scale and enough efficiency and hopefully good enough technology that people will pay for them and the EVs will start making money. At that point, you've got a great business again, but also one that doesn't need as many workers, because when you don't have all those complicated engines and transmissions in the same way, you just don't need as many bodies.
And so how would a deal work or a strike work in terms of dealing with 3 different companies here? What have you heard about the potential plans? Would all 3 companies have to come up with something? How does that work?
We don't know how it works just because it's never been done. In the 88 years of the UAW, they have had many strikes, but never against multiple automakers at once, never against the big 3 all at once. So they are very serious and a lot of strike threats, and we could be in some unprecedented waters pretty soon.
What do you think a strike could mean for consumers and car prices?
There's not a whole lot of inventory. Prices are just starting to come back to where most vehicles are selling for sticker price instead of more than sticker. If there's an extended strike, especially against all 3, you can expect prices to go up, and you can also expect the Detroit 3 to lose a lot of market share to the other companies that are producing at full blast, like Toyota, Honda, Hyundai, and Tesla.
Okay, so what about a new deal that avoids a strike but will cost automakers more? Will prices be passed on to the end consumer then?
Possibly, but it's a really competitive market. So it's more likely that the benefits of a rich contract will come out of the shareholders' pockets more so than the customers' pockets.
So what do you think? Do you actually expect a strike? And if so, what's your prediction for how long it might last?
I think there's almost certainly going to be a strike. You have so many frustrated members who are itching for a fight. But you look at the UPS, that was a really contentious negotiation. They ended up getting a pretty generous contract. And while there was some hand-wringing on the vote, it passed overwhelmingly. Possibly the same thing happens with the UAW, but it feels like the union leadership is going to want to let everybody go on strike, let them demonstrate and show their frustration. I think the hope would be that it's a short strike and that the 2 sides don't get too bogged down in digging their heels too much.
What is the impact of a strike, though, on the workers? And are they ready for a long strike where they're not getting paid?
Well, it depends how the strike takes form. Let's say if it's a normal strike, whether it's 1 company or 3 companies, the workers walk off the job. After a week, like starting on the 8th day, they'll get $500 a week in strike pay, which is not as much as they make in their normal pay, but they can sort of plan for it. A lot of them try to save up ahead of time when they know there might be a strike. They can go on strike for quite a while, but if they're all 3 on strike, if it's like you said, 140, 150,000 workers on strike, they could run out of cash in a few months, at least from the strike fund. Now, maybe members are willing to stay on strike and just fund their own strike, but that could be a real challenge.
As we are in this final week before that deadline that the union has given, any final thought or final takeaway for our audience?
One of the things that's especially curious about this round of talks is that the Detroit Auto Show used to always be held in January, and now it's held in September. And in fact, it starts next week, the same week that the contract expires. There's a black tie gala scheduled for Friday night, typically draws all the big executives as well as supplier executives and a lot of just other folks around the industry who want to get together and celebrate. They used to call it like auto prom. There could be picketers outside the center downtown Detroit when people are trying to go in their tuxedos and gowns to drink champagne and celebrate the new cars that are coming from GM, Ford, and Stellantis. Could be a very awkward situation.
Well, thank you so much to both of our guests today. For more on the auto industry, check out the podcast called Daily Drive and go to autonews.com for the latest auto news. And be sure to visit ZipRecruiter.com's blog page for more analysis of the labor market. We'll, of course, bring you updates as well right here on The Newsworthy during our daily news roundups every weekday. In 10 minutes, we keep you in the know about the day's top stories and beyond. So we'll be back on Monday. Until then, have a great weekend.